an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Carmel, Indiana, authorizing and approving an additional appropriation of funds from the General Fund Number 101 to the 2020 Mayor's Office budget. Sponsors are Councilors Campbell, Finkham, Austin, Kimball, Nelson, Ryder, and Worrell. And this is returning from the Finance, Utilities, and Rules Committee. Councilor Finkham.
Thank you, Madam President. As I mentioned earlier, this is coming back from committee with a positive recommendation on a 3-0 vote. I've asked Mr. Mayor to be here to present the same information he presented at committee in our larger council meeting, so we can again educate the council and the community on what the purpose of the purchase of these 2 sculptures is for. And again, just to remind everybody, is this ordinance authorizes the council to appropriate another $180,000 for the purchase of 2 J. Seward Johnson sculptures. This was introduced at our last council meeting. There was some discussion and concern about in particular, the one statue, which is of a little black girl playing on a stop sign. And that perhaps the image was out of date and it didn't appropriately represent the community as it is today. And so the mayor had some information to share, and I want to give him an opportunity now.
I'll try to be fairly brief. And this has been, part of our economic development strategy in the Art and Design District to bring that area back from the blight it was experiencing a couple decades ago. And we chose to make it an art and design district, and public sculpture is one part of that. In addition, a lot of infrastructure investments and other public-private partnerships to get new buildings built and so on. We started to look at different types of public sculpture over 20 years ago and made the decision to try to have the largest outdoor walking exhibit of Seward Johnson's one series. He's unfortunately died at age 89, I believe, in March of this year. But he's done a number of series where he takes the bronze and has this process which is somewhat unique to paint the bronze. These are meant to be realistic sculptures that the community can interact with and have fun with, and if anybody's sat there and watched them for long, there's lots and lots of photos taken with those sculptures and visitors. And we believe it brings in a lot of revenue to the city and its small businesses and restaurants and shops and boutiques because people come here to see them. The series, though, he has one series, it's the old French Impressionists, and it's called Outside the Frame from the 19th century. This series is meant to be depicting, with the exception of the sailor kissing the nurse, a depiction of American life in the late 1960s and early 1970s. You can see that from the clothing. You can see the street musician in front of the music store has on bell-bottom pants and a ponytail. The dad pushing the little girl on the bicycle was titled First Ride, right by Basbo Pizza on the Monon Trail. We actually had to put a plaque on the ground that explained why the little girl doesn't have a helmet, because anybody that's old enough to remember knows that we didn't wear helmets when we were kids in the 60s and 70s. It just wasn't done yet. And so we have a plaque explaining that this is part of the series. And that dad in the picture not only has a hairstyle from the 70s, he has corduroy pants on and very 70s look, as do all the other renditions. This is meant to be a historical series that depicts American life in the early 1970s, late 1960s. So the little girl is dressed in clothing that you probably wouldn't see today, purposely, because it was done in the 80s. I should also point out that no more than 8 of each one of these sculptures is cast. And since Johnson did die in March, there will be never be any more made by him. The same process can be used by his atelier, but not there won't be any more. Obviously, he can't do any more himself. So we were somewhat fortunate to be able to acquire I got a lot of input from various people in the community. That this was, I think there were 3 depicting African Americans available. And everyone, it was unanimous, people we showed it to liked this one the best. The other 2 were adults, and we thought it was fun to have a child. The sculpture that we're talking about that would represent members of the Indian community would not be a Johnson. We'd work with his atelier to do it, but he's not with us anymore, so it won't have his name on it. It'd be a similar type of process and similar look and feel to it, perhaps. So that can be done in any style we want. But this, the small child is meant to depict historical. It's a historical piece from 65 or so years ago. So maybe not quite that long, 55 years ago. Do my math right, 55 years ago. The Indian community, I should point out, some of the leaders in the Indian community have come to me and said, we'd like to add to the one that's in the appropriation is enough to, bronze is expensive. That's the most expensive part of this is the material. But they'd like to raise some money and add a couple and perhaps have a family, an Indian family, or at least a husband and wife together for their sculpture. So we'll continue to look at them. I should also add that you know, this isn't a one-time thing only where we're going to try to acquire sculptures of people of color and people of different ethnicities in Carmel. We want our entire collection in two different ways to represent our community. So we're looking at other sculptures of members of communities of color. We're also looking at using artists of communities of color. This isn't a one-shot and we're done sort of thing. So we're working with an interracial group of high school students that would be guided by high school art teachers to put murals in some of the Monon tunnels. There's also a gallery in Carmel owned by an African American that has a lot of African artists from the continent of Africa. And so we've been working with the Parks Department to see if we can put very good sculptures. We can put some of these in some of our public parks for the community to enjoy. That's what we're doing right now. We will continue as time goes on. We have a big Chinese community in Carmel as a percent of our population as well. And so we need to do something that shows, that brings that community, makes them feel included in our public artwork as well. So this is not a one-time thing, but something I want to pay more attention to as time goes on and continue to make sure our collection, both in terms of the artists doing the work and the depictions, represent our community as a whole.
Any questions from council or comments? Councilor Austin.
Thank you, Madam President. So the J. Seward Johnson statues, everybody has a lot of different opinions on them. If you look on social media, some people love them, some people don't like them, but that's artwork. Artwork is subjective, and you're never going to have a piece of artwork that everybody likes. And I think some of the criticisms that were brought up about this statue here could apply to any of the J. Seward Johnson statues, that they were out of date. As a business owner on Main Street, and Councilor Ryder can say the same thing, we see a lot of people who stop and take their pictures with these statues. So regardless of your opinion, I think they are very noticeable and a lot of people do enjoy them. I'm making my decision tonight regardless of evaluating the artwork, because in my opinion, the City Council's job isn't to select the artwork. We're the fiscal body, and we leave that to the executive to decide what artwork is appropriate for the area. I do think the comments that were made that we need more artwork done by African American artists is a good comment, and as the mayor said, he is interested in doing that in the future too. So I look forward to seeing more diversity in the city. And I will be voting yes because I think our goal is to approve the artwork and then kind of leave the art decisions to the executive. Thank you.
I should mention, too, that we have two other African Americans in that ensemble of musicians in front of the palladium. Those are not owned by the city. They're on loan from the Johnson organization, which has been very nice of them. At some point, we may want to try to buy those as well. But this will be the first African American one we actually own. The other two are on loan.
Mayor, sometime I would like to see a statue or a piece of art also representing the disability community. I don't know if there's anything in the Johnson collection or something that we can work on in the future, but our disability committee got up and running. We were a little delayed by COVID, but I think that's something I'd like to see in the future.
That's a good idea. It's something I had not thought of. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Councilor Hanna.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm actually glad we had this discussion that's brought up. I want to thank Councilor Nelson, who was not able to join us live, who sent this to committee. There was a move at the last meeting to approve this, and I'm glad we had more public comment and offered the opportunity for Mayor Brainerd to come and add more detail to this. I think the things that come out of this that are helpful for all of us is to understand better the current selection process for public art. It is very reassuring to know that there are at least plans for additional pieces of art, because I think we not only need to diversify our statues, we need to diversify our art forms as well, not just statues. I've heard from several constituents, you point to the historical nature of these, although I do like the sailor kissing the woman, the VE Day with my Navy background. But these are historic in a period. This is Carmel. There's nothing historic about any of these statues. There is no one of note from the city of Carmel who has a statue, teacher, coach, civic dignitary, etc. So I think we need to have the history of Carmel also built into this, as well as Carmel artists. And we talked earlier in some detail at the committee meeting about the process could be better defined so the public understands what is the vetting process, who is involved in that, community input, etc. So again, I think that's one of the significant upsides of this discussion, is just letting the public know the current process, and it's in everything, how do we continually improve it. The issue that I really have with this is the funding of this and the timing of the funding of this. Again, I think it's great that we're getting, at this point, more diverse statues. The line item that typically funds statues comes from the mayor's Support for the Arts Fund. It was established some time ago that roughly 1% of either the operational budget or the global budget was dedicated to support from the arts. Now that's in addition to dollars that go to support the Center for Performing Arts, which is close to probably $3 million in direct and indirect support. Those funds were already used for this year for a variety of funds, a variety of projects as well, and we are on the cusp of approving next year, in less than 90 days, another $1.3 million and change for support for the arts for next year. So from my perspective, although I applaud that we are diversifying our statues, I don't see that it's prudent to spend the money in this budgetary cycle where we've already spent $1.3, almost $1.4 million on public support for the arts, when we have it available literally just around the corner. And the last thing I want to point out is that we are in a hopefully, once in a lifetime, once in a century pandemic. To spend $180,000 out of what essentially amounts to reserves on artwork when we have funds available within the next 90 days, when we have small businesses that are suffering, when we have families that are suffering, when we have food insecurity, just does not seem to be the right thing from an optics or a highest and best use of dollars. So if we have additional funds available at the year end that we can be using that don't need to be put into reserve funds, I think the council should be using those funds for small business support, to put into food pantries or other things that could support our businesses and our families in the pandemic.
Well, I should point out that we have been supporting our food pantries. We started in March. Our staff checks with them on a periodic basis, weekly in the beginning, to make certain. I think there were 3 food pantries in Carmel we've supported with cash, and it's been reimbursed out of the Federal CARES Act, or it will be. So I believe that's taken care of. And we had the federal PPE. Some of our neighboring communities did loans and grants to businesses. We're just not set up to be banks, which is why I believe the federal government laid out the fact that the local banks would administer the federal programs. We have no way to check credit. We have nowhere to, business that applies. What if they go out of business the next day after receiving a grant or a loan? How do we collect overdue loans? It's just not what city government is set up to do. What this does, though, is create tourism. People come here to see our public art. They shop in our restaurants and our boutiques and our small stores. I guess my last comment, Councilor, would be suggest we take it out of next year's grants to local arts organizations. Which ones would we cut to pay for this?
Councilor?
So again, I would go back to a couple things. One is that surrounding communities have found ways to give small business grants, Noblesville, Fishers, as well as Indianapolis. We did give some money early on in the pandemic, but the need is probably greater because the pandemic is not going away. We're a long way from having distribution of the vaccine and herd immunity. PPP is going away. In fact, the need is probably greater for small business grants, for food insecurity grants, for restaurants that now have to basically deal with decreased capacity but not the nice weather. So again, I believe if we have additional funds available, the highest and best use of those funds would be to support our community, our businesses, as well as our families, rather than using these funds for these statues. Statues do not feed people. Statues do not keep businesses open. And again, we have these dollars available that could be easily used in less than 90 days.
Councilor Green?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Mayor, I appreciate the explanation you had, on selecting the artwork. It sounds reasonable. You used a kind of logical process to go through. And you said you reached out to a number of individuals and got their feedback, had them take a look at the art. So I do appreciate that. But one of the issues I have is that of the process, and it didn't solicit really any feedback at all. There's a lot of people in the community who feel disenfranchised, feel that sometimes things are done without transparency, and suddenly they hear in the news that a couple statues were selected and picked, whether they were actually purchased yet or not. But a number of people in the community feel disenfranchised and not feel like they don't have any input. Council Campbell just brought up the statue of disabilities. I've heard people talk about from the Chinese community and the large Chinese population that they like the statue, and there's other groups that like to have some type of input, and they really had no input in this current process. Not that you reached out to certain individuals, but depending on who you specifically target, there's a lot of people who felt like they didn't have input. So that's one of the issues that I have, and I would have liked to select these statues 6 months from now so the community had more input into. And I don't mean the community should get to select the statues. That should be done by the elected officials, but you're talking about getting feedback. And I don't believe we really got any feedback in picking the statues. The second issue that I have is the financial piece. Like Councilor Hannon brought up, businesses have struggled in the last year, people have struggled in the last year, nonprofits have struggled trying to provide for people who need help. And for us to just spend $180,000 on statues, non-essential things right now, there's better uses for those funds. So for those reasons, I'm not going to be supporting this.
Okay. Councilor Ryder?
Madam President, I had a little help in remembering this, but we do have one historic statue, and that would be Officer Carey on Main Street, right by the Monon, the only officer to be killed in the line of duty in Carmel. And I also want to point out, I regularly have been hearing other cities' best practices. I want to point out that in 13 years, what I have seen most is other cities coming to us to learn our best practices. There's not a lot broken. I'm not sure that there's a lot that we want to emulate of other communities. I think we're doing it pretty well. It doesn't mean we don't look at what people are doing and improve what we're doing, but there's a reason that we keep getting the ratings and the accolades nationwide that we're getting. Thank you.
Councilor Worrell?
Thank you, Madam President. Councilor Nelson, if you can hear, I'm going to base some of my comments on what I think you said in committee. This is kind of the way things work. The mayor cannot purchase these statues until the city council has appropriated the money. A reporter looks at our agenda, says, what's this for? And it ends up in the newspaper. And I think, as Councilor Austin pointed out, what the mayor says is not always what gets printed. So it is the way that this works. So I'm glad that this is out there. We heard from Ms. McNear, who came and spoke to us at our last council. And for me, this is more about, I guess I'm disappointed that we're quibbling over timing when, in my opinion, we are trying to address a group of our residents who also feel disenfranchised. Shame on me that I did not realize this. I heard the mayor saying that he was going to pay closer attention to this. I've said before, sometimes I don't know what I don't know. But when it is raised, when the issue is raised that there are residents in our community who do not feel welcome or who do not believe that our Main Street represents them as well, I want this fixed last week. I want it fixed last month. And for us to quibble over where this money comes from, that is our job, but I will have no part of it. I want this money approved. We still have a 60-day waiting period where the mayor has to inform the committee to make the purchase. They get to weigh in before he can do anything. And for me, this is personal, it's emotional, and I want our residents, every resident, to feel welcome in our community, our guests to feel welcome, and I would ask you to reconsider quibbling over $180,000 and $110 million budget.
Councilor Nelson, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful points. I had an opportunity to speak with the mayor after the last city council meeting, and we discussed the concern of some of my constituents and others in the greater community that they were concerned that this particular statue didn't necessarily represent them well, that that's not how they saw themselves today. The mayor explained to me that this was a part of a collection from the 1970s, but more importantly, the mayor also shared his vision that there was going to be more statues, or let me correct that, more artwork representing the African American community and other communities of color. And also, just as importantly, he was going to use artists of color and representatives of other minority communities in our city. And so that makes me hopeful. And so that is why I will be voting in favor of allocating this money to these two particular statues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Austin.
Thank you, Madam President. I just kind of want to echo what Councilor Worrell said. As a business owner, I feel what we can do to help our businesses is to make Carmel as welcoming a community as possible. That attracts people who want to live here, who want to come here and spend money. And I think for our minority community, having representation when it comes to the artwork is an important part of feeling welcome. I think it's a shame that we would say that $180,000 is too much to spend when it comes to artwork that represents the minority community, but I don't remember that ever being brought up when it comes to statues that represented other communities. So I think it's important for us to have this diversity. I think this is a first step, and I do think it's part of our economic development to increase the welcomeness that people feel when they come to Carmel.
Councilor Finkham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you everyone for the robust conversation on this topic this evening, both in committee and here in the council meeting. I too am in support of this to make sure we've had people ask for representation from the Black community in this collection off and on over the years, and I didn't realize we had any even available. So I know the mayor looked at this several months ago, and I'm glad we're moving forward with it, and I'd like to make a motion that we approve this evening.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilor Hannan.
I'm sorry, I know we usually only get 2 bites of the apple, but, you know, since things were thrown my way, $180,000 is not a quibble. It's a lot of money. It's taxpayer money. Number two,
The discussion has to be relative to the motion, Councilor Finkham reminded me. So it's the discussion on the motion.
Okay.
Only.
So I'm supportive of the statutes, not funding them at this time.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All right, no further discussion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against?
Nay.
Nay.
All right, so that would be 7-2. All right, the motion carries.